The 9,798th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. Under Rule 37, in accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Lebanon, the Syrian Arab Republic, and Turkey to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I intend to invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting: Mr. Geir Pedersen, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria, and Mr. Riyad El-Saleh, Director of the White Helmets. The representative of the Russian Federation has asked to take the floor. I give the floor to Russia.
Господин председатель, прежде чем начнется это заседание, я хочу привлечь внимание к недопустимой линии американского председательства, которое, к сожалению, с первого дня злоупотребило своими полномочиями. Данное заседание созвано по просьбе Афротройки плюс Гаяна, поддержанной Россией и Китаем. Ни одна из западных делегаций, включая самих Соединенных Штатов, в национальном качестве данный вопрос не поддержала. Видимо, ситуация в Сирии, которая подвергается беспрецедентной и явно скоординированной извне террористической атаке, их не заботит. Это же не ритуальное заседание по набившему у всех оскомину украинскому сюжету, на котором можно набрать очки перед внутренней аудиторией. Но американское председательство пошло еще дальше. В нарушение сложившейся практики, без всяких консультаций с теми делегациями, которые запросили заседание, самовольно добавив дополнительного докладчика, представителя одиозной НПО «Белые каски». Белокасочники, как известно, были неоднократно замараны в масштабных фальсификациях, нацеленных на очернение сирийских властей. Они не обладают вообще никакой экспертизой в отношении того, что сейчас происходит в Алеппо. И в этот критический для сирийского государства момент, когда Совет должен проявить солидарность перед лицом террористической угрозы, американское председательство пытается внести в его ряды раскол, политизировать дискуссию. Такая линия Соединенных Штатов недостойна статуса постоянного члена Совета Безопасности ООН. Мы требуем провести голосование по кандидатуре дополнительного докладчика и призываем членов Совета Безопасности голосовать против американского предложения. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. A representative from the United Kingdom has asked to take the floor. I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I just want to say that we fully support the inclusion of Mr. Al-Saleh at this meeting. He and the White Helmets have worked tirelessly over 10 years to risking their lives to save the lives of the worst affected by the conflict in Syria, and it's only right that he should be able to share his experience of the ongoing violence with us today. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom. In view of the comments made by the Council members, I propose to put to the vote the proposal to extend an invitation under Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure to Mr. Riyad El-Saleh, Director of the White Helmets, to participate in the Security Council briefing under the agenda item, the situation in the Middle East. I shall put it to a vote now. Will those in favor of the proposal to extend an invitation under Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure to Mr. Riyad El-Saleh please raise their hand? Against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows. 11 votes in favor, 2 votes against, 2 abstentions. The proposal to invite Mr. Raed El Saleh has been adopted. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Geir Pedersen.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the last week, we have seen dramatic shifts in front lines in Syria, radically altering a status quo that had been largely in place well over 4 years. The situation is extremely fluid and dangerous. But as I brief you today, a vast swath of territory has come under the control of non-state actors, including Security Council-listed terrorist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and armed opposition groups, including the Syrian National Army. These groups now de facto control territory containing what we estimate to be some 7 million people, including Aleppo, Syria's second biggest city, and a vast and diverse metropolis of more than 2 million people. On 27 November, the Al-Fatah al-Malbeen Joint Operation Rooms, a coalition containing both HTS and armed opposition groups, launched a ground operation with drone cover across agreed de-escalation lines, taking de facto control of almost the entirety of Aleppo and Idlib governorates. Syrian government forces have since regrouped and established defensive lines in Hama, repelling some fighters. But as I speak to you this afternoon, these are being severely tested, with HTS and armed opposition groups gaining ground today, advancing very close to Hama, a major city of some 1 million people. Pro-government airstrikes have intensified in recent days, with reports of strikes on both military and civilian targets, including civilian infrastructure, such as hospitals, causing civilian casualties. As HTS and armed opposition groups have advanced, they have fired barrages of drones and rockets, with reports of civilian casualties as a result in Aleppo and also in Hama. Meanwhile, we have seen violence erupt on the second axis, with the opposition Syrian National Army launching an operation on 30th November on Tal Rifat, a pocket north of Aleppo city, under de facto control of SDF-affiliated forces. In response, SDF forces in northeast Syria moved rapidly to connect with these pockets. The SNA has now largely defeated these forces in these areas, with a large-scale evacuation of fighters and tens of thousands of civilians to northeast Syria. In addition, the potential for conflict on other axes remain alive. This morning, the SDF took 7 villages previously under the control of government forces in Deir ez-Zor, citing an imminent ISIL threat, reportedly with military support from US-led international coalition. There has been increased frontline hostilities between the SNA and SDF in areas of the northeast, with reports of escalating tensions as we speak near Menbil now. Israeli airstrikes hit the Syrian-Lebanese border this week, as well as Damascus today. Mr. President, The Syrian government has said the terrorist attacks pose grave dangers to Syria's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, to regional security, and to the international community. It has stated its intention to combat terrorism and restore all Syrian territories to its control. Russia and Iran have expressed their support, saying the attacks are a violation of Astana agreements and also blaming external forces. The Syrian opposition and affiliated institutions initially framed the operation as deterring what they said was escalating attacks by Syrian government forces on civilians and enabling the return of the displaced. Statements since have said the operation will continue until the government engages in a political process to implement Resolution 2254 and announced intentions to seize territory from the Syrian government and the SDF. Turkey has characterized events as a response to repeated violation of the Astana agreements, stating it is not involved in current clashes. Turkey has said these events show that Damascus was reconciled with both its people and the legitimate political opposition in Syria. The United States, which has forces on the ground in eastern Syria, has said it has nothing to do with the offensive, calling for de-escalation and a credible UN-led political process. Mr. President, let me stress, the situation is in flux, and it is very early days with an unclear information environment. But you need to be aware that these developments have provoked different reactions among the Syrian people. A grave threat for some, a signal of hope for others. We have seen a series of public pronouncements by different armed actors in the Northwest, including Security Council designated HTS, offering reassurances to all civilians, including minorities, and including assurances of religious freedom. In the last 3 days, we have seen some media reports of civilians in Aleppo continuing their normal lives, for instance, with churches holding services this weekend. But, Mr. President, at the same time, some civilian and minority voices have expressed to us despair and fear about what it would mean over time for these areas to come under the control of armed factions that include a Security Council-listed terrorist group. Some women leaders have expressed particular fears or concerns and are seeking reassurances. There are reports of services resuming in Aleppo, but there are also fears about what it will mean for service delivery if designated entities oversee de facto administrative arrangements in a city of 2 million people. This is particularly concerning, and therefore it will be important that this Council renew the relevant provisions of the humanitarian carve-out in Security Council Resolution 2664. I hope all of those with influence can address these issues. Mr. President, there are videos and testimonies of detainees, men and women, being released from detention centers, including some who say they were detained for over a decade. But equally, there have been videos of large-scale detention of prisoners of war by HTS and armed opposition groups. There are signs of many displaced persons from inside and outside Syria returning to their homes for the first time in years, or even a decade. But equally, tens of thousands have already been displaced, some by airstrikes, some by increased hostilities, and some by shift in control. In Sheikh Massoud and other neighborhoods in Aleppo city, there are tens of thousands of civilians under the control of some remaining IPG or SDF units, expressing fears that they too may soon be forced to leave their homes. Underlying all of this is an enormous uncertainty about the immediate future and the danger that more bloodshed could be on its way. Mr. President, my first core message today is simple. We need de-escalation and we need calm. I appeal to all parties to their obligations under international law to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure and allow safe passage for Syrians fleeing violence. But, Mr. President, this alone does not suffice. Further military escalation risks mass displacement and civilian casualties. The last 14 years of conflict have decisively shown that no Syrian party or existing grouping of actors can resolve the Syrian conflict via military means. We must de-escalate and ensure a cooperative approach to countering listed terrorist groups. Excuse me. But, and this is my second core message, de-escalation needs to be accompanied by a credible political horizon for the Syrian people. For almost half a decade, we saw front lines frozen and violence often elevated but somewhat contained due to a patchwork of ceasefire arrangements agreed between international actors in 2019 and 2020. This was positive. But without being pegged to a political process to resolve the crisis, this amounted only to a conflict management approach. And this is not enough. I have long been warning that this was unsustainable, especially after rising violence within Syria the last 3 years, alongside regional spillover and expanding Israeli strikes. Now, in the space of a week, we have seen the de-escalation lines agreed in 2020 and earlier entirely unraveled. Excuse me. Mr. President, the Syrian parties and key international stakeholders need to be seriously engaged in meaningful and substantive negotiations to find a way out of this conflict. That is why today I call for urgent and serious political engagement among Syrian and international stakeholders to spare bloodshed and focus on a political solution in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2254. Mr. President, to this end, I have been working the phone with a full range of Syrian parties and key international stakeholders, urging concrete and immediate action on these two fronts, including with the Syrian government, the Syrian opposition, Turkey, Russia, Iran, United States, and Arab and European players. I will be in the region in the coming days for a range of high-level meetings. I have clearly signaled and signal here once again my readiness to use my good offices to convene international and Syrian stakeholders in new and comprehensive peace talks on Syria. I have been sharing and discussing ideas in this regard for several months, precisely because I anticipated that the unsustainable status quo would collapse and a common consensus on a comprehensive approach would be needed. An approach that goes beyond only the resumption on constitutional committee meetings, but which addresses the full range of aspirations and concerns: the political process, sovereignty, security, economic conditions and sanctions, the detained and missing, and the refugees and the displaced. Mr. President, These ideas are more, not less relevant following the events of this week. I urge all parties to engage not only on containing the crisis, but on resolving this conflict. That is what is needed now. Mr. President, there is no military solution to this conflict. If we do not see de-escalation and a rapid move towards a serious political process involving the Syrian parties and the key international players, then I fear we will see a deepening of the crisis. Syria will be in grave danger of further division, deterioration, and destruction. The consequences for the sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria, and for the well-being and aspirations of the Syrian people could be grave indeed. Mr. President, this should be in no one's interest. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Pedersen for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Raed El Saleh. You have the floor, sir.
السيد الرئيس السيدات
Mr. President, esteemed members of the Security Council, I thank you for inviting me to brief you and for giving me your precious time. Almost 10 years ago, I addressed this very council and spoke about the horror of exploding barrels, forced displacement, forced disappearance, siege, and other war crimes. I urged you to end these crimes against the Syrian people. These past 10 years, much has changed, but these crimes have not. The world has started to forget the tragedy of the Syrians, and today I am in the same place, and I address you with the same demands. I renew my call upon you to put an end to these crimes and to achieve peace. I hesitated before calling on you again, but my responsibility towards Syria compels me to stand here once again. For 6 days now, and as the map of military control has changed on the ground, brutal attacks launched by the Syrian regime, Russia, and Iranian cross-border militias on Syrians have escalated, especially in areas outside their control in northwest Syria. The White Helmets have responded to 275 attacks. These attacks have killed 100 civilians at least. They have wounded 360 others. These attacks have displaced tens of thousands of residents, most of whom are women and children. These attacks deliberately targeted civilians and vital infrastructure, including schools, hospitals, and IDP camps. Who would expect a member state of the United Nations and a permanent member of the Security Council to take part in such a heinous crime and to cross thousands of kilometers with its aircraft to launch deadly attacks on the population and destroy hospitals and vital facilities? Ladies and gentlemen, the state of Russia, whose representative is participating in the session today, yesterday launched brutal airstrikes that put 4 hospitals in the city of Idlib out of service in violation of international laws and norms. Of these hospitals was a maternity hospital. Imagine what happened to the patients there. I will tell you. Among the cases that we documented were 2 patients inside the hospital who died after their ventilators were destroyed by the airstrike in the ICU unit. We have all the documents and the evidence of this brutal and deliberate attack. Yesterday was one of the bloodiest days in recent memory. The Assad regime and Russia killed 25 civilians, most of them children. They wounded 66 others. It is a day I will never forget. I will never forget the faces of the children, the looks in their eyes, after the Syrian regime's warplanes targeted their tents in a camp near Idlib. You may wonder, why would a warplane target a tent made of cloth and kill 7 children and their mother? The answer is simply to kill, no more. The children were waiting anxiously to say goodbye to these tents, to return to their village in the Hama countryside, a village which they only know by name. But they left, and their dreams left with them. And when their father saw what happened to them, he went insane. He lost his entire family. He lost them and was left alone, carrying their memories and what remained of their blood-soaked clothes. Aleppo is a city of history. It is a city of civilization. And now it has a share of Syrian-Russian death and destruction. After the balance of power on the ground changed, Aleppo and the surrounding area are no longer under the control of the regime and the Iranian militias. And once again, the residents are paying the price for the regime and its allies' scorched earth policy of collective punishment instead of pushing for a political solution. Today, we remember the early days of our work in Aleppo in 2013, when barrel bombs were raining down on civilians. And today, we are witnessing again this scorched earth policy, this collective punishment that the Syrian regime and its allies is pursuing. Over the past few days, we responded to airstrikes that targeted a university hospital, they targeted a church, residential areas in the city, and public squares. This is a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. And here I address my people in Aleppo. We are by your side. We are with you. We share your fears of further military escalation. We seek to support you. We seek to heal your wounds. My colleagues, the people of Aleppo, were able to return to it and help its people after they were forcibly displaced by the al-Assad regime a few years ago. We have dispatched ambulances and specialized teams to work alongside the humanitarian partners and emergency services in this city. And we are constantly assessing the situation to adapt our actions according to the situation and our capabilities. The White Helmets, and since our formation, have been unwavering in our mission to support the people of Syria in all their diverse backgrounds. We are from the people and for the people. Tragically, it has become impossible for us to continue to provide our services in areas that came under the control of the regime. This is because of its deliberate targeting of our volunteers. Over the years, we have lost 313 volunteers, mostly due to the deliberate military targeting of our personnel, vehicles, and centers by the regime and by Russia. Mr. President, I am very concerned about the lives of every Syrian man, woman, and child because of the real threat of chemical attacks used by the Syrian regime, a regime that has a long history of using chemical weapons for military gain. It used chemical weapons in its attacks on Douma and the Damascus countryside in 2018 and in many other places. The Syrian regime has admitted to its continued development and production of chemical weapons, according to the report of the Director General of the OPCW. And this is a dangerous indicator, as has been stated by UN Security Council Resolution 2118 and the Chemical Weapons Convention. The failure of the international community to hold the regime accountable for these violations puts the civilians at risk of the use of these weapons at any moment. And we, as Syrians, are fully aware that Russia has been involved in obstructing international decisions and efforts aimed at addressing chemical weapons. We call on Syria to end its support and protection of the Syrian regime by using the veto against international resolutions. We call for it to stop spreading disinformation related to the White Helmets and international investigation teams at every occasion. We urge Russia to halt its obstruction of the path to justice and accountability. Mr. President, members of the Council, the scale of this crisis requires immediate and decisive action. It requires concrete steps to protect civilians and end attacks on vital facilities and humanitarian workers and first responders. The continued violations of international humanitarian law must end now. This includes the looming threat of chemical attacks. It is important to work with all local and regional parties to ensure that all sides adhere to international humanitarian law and refrain from targeting humanitarian workers. and respect the human rights of all civilians regardless of their affiliations or the identity of the forces controlling their areas. There is no reason that justifies the deliberate targeting of civilians, their infrastructure, or their dignity. This escalation comes at a time when only 30% of the Syria humanitarian response plan has been met. It is the lowest level since the start of the humanitarian crisis in Syria. Yet, and despite these difficult circumstances, Syrian NGOs are leading the humanitarian response. There is an immediate need for funding and aid to reach affected civilians, and I urge the Council to safeguard cross-border access so that aid continues to get to those most in need. Mr. President, members of the Council, the Syrian people have appealed to you to take immediate action to end these atrocities and to ensure peace, which is a core responsibility of the Council. However, in recent years, you have not only failed to heed these calls, but tragically, many of your governments have chosen to forget Syria altogether. The international community has failed Syria politically and in terms of humanitarian response. Syria was a testing ground for impunity, and a failure to hold perpetrators accountable has had catastrophic repercussions far beyond our borders, emboldening perpetrators from Ukraine to Sudan to Gaza. At its root, the current crisis is political and not humanitarian. Syrians need a clear timeline for a political solution that will ensure the protection of civilians, plans for a transition period that leads to free elections, and dismantles the harmful sources of regional instability caused by the production and smuggling of drugs and the expulsion of foreign militias. It is important that the Council accelerates efforts to push for a political solution in accordance with Resolution 2254 to ensure lasting peace. This Council has utterly failed the Syrian people for over 13 years, and I hope that my words today will not fall on deaf ears again. My final message to you and to the whole world is Syrians in Damascus, Aleppo, Daraa, Suwaida, Idlib, the Coast, the Jazeera, Homs, Hama, still yearn for freedom, for change, and for a chance to build a country where they can live a dignified and peaceful life. United as Syrians under a national identity, they will never stop calling for justice and accountability. I thank you.
I thank Mr. Al-Saleh for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Algeria. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the member of the E3+, namely Guyana, Mozambique, Sierra Leone, and my own country, Algeria. At the outset, the E3+ would like to thank Mr. Peterson for his valuable briefing. We also listened carefully to the representatives of the civil society. The E3+ thank the United States Presidency of the Security Council for convening this meeting promptly at our request. Mr. President, the E3+ expressed grave alarm and deep concern over the recent escalation of hostilities in Syria, which began on 27 November. These attacks, including those perpetrated by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a group designated as a terrorist organization by this very Security Council, have led to the tragic loss of innocent civilian lives, including women and children, significant damage to civilian infrastructure, and the suspension of critical services. The E3+ have consistently warned against the resurgence of terrorism in Syria. Regrettably, these warnings have now materialized. This tragic escalation serves as a stark reminder of the fragility and severity of the situation in Syria, nearly 14 years since the onset of the crisis. It also underscores the pressing need for enhanced coordination to effectively combat terrorism. Today, there is no longer time for mere conflict management. We must prioritize finding a durable solution. It's clear to all that there is no military solution to the Syrian crisis. The only viable path forward is a political solution that preserves Syria's unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. In this regard, the E3 Plus reaffirmed their firm belief that inclusive dialogue among Syrians, supported by the international community, remains the only sustainable and just pathway to resolving this protracted crisis. We reiterate our support for the effort of the Special Envoy and urge all parties to engage constructively with his initiatives to break the current deadlock. The E3 Plus also underscored the importance of recovering the Constitutional Committee and revitalizing the Syrian-owned and Syrian-led political process in line with Resolution 2254. Mr. President, Syrians must rise to meet the challenges threatening their country. They must set aside their differences and unite to shape a better future for Syria, free from terrorism and where all Syrians can realize their legitimate aspiration, a future built on peace, dignity, and hope for all Syrians. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana. You have the floor, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry, I have a different one. Yeah, my apologies, I have a different one. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we thank the Special Envoy, Mr. Peterson, for the report of the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic, which has encountered an unprecedented since 2020 terrorist attack by Security Council listed fighters from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the HTS, formerly Jabhat al-Nusra, and the illegal armed groups who have joined them. We regret the fact that the Special Envoy, like other UN representatives, were unable to summon the courage to call a spade, and to condemn these terrorist attacks against the Syrian Arab Republic. We share the concerns and assessments set out in a letter by the permanent representative of Syria to the Security Council dating 1 December. We are meeting here today in connection with the fact that on 27 November, former Nusra representatives violated the 2020 agreement reached with mediation on the establishment of a ceasefire in Idlib. They began a large-scale offensive in breach of this agreement in northwest Syria. In the hostility, several thousand fighters are on their side. The terrorists have seized significant swathes of Aleppo. They have been carrying out artillery strikes against western, southwestern, and central parts of the city. As a result of the offensive by the fighters, at least 30 civilians have already perished, and we are also aware of the deaths of 2 OCHA representatives. UNHCR representatives. For our part, we categorically condemn this coordinated attack by HTS terrorists who control Idlib, destabilizing the already fraught situation on Syrian soil. We've repeatedly warned against the inadmissibility of colluding with international terrorists who have entrenched themselves in direct proximity to Aleppo. However, our Western colleagues, motivated by hatred towards the legitimate authorities in Syria, have continued to cooperate with these terrorists. And here's the result. The fighters were lying in wait for their hour to come. They capitalized on the dire situation in the country, first and foremost in the Golan Heights and on the border with Lebanon, to stab the Syrian people in the back. In this way, the Middle East crisis, which has been metastasizing since October 2023, has gained yet another Syrian dimension. From the very first day of the terrorist attack, the Syrian armed forces, with support of the Russian aerospace forces and those of allies, operating at the request of the legitimate authorities of Syria, have been repelling the fighters with the use of fighter jets, artillery, multiple launch rocket systems. Precision-guided and calibrated strikes are being carried out against terror movement positions and the fighters who have joined them. From the beginning of the operation, approximately 400 terrorists have been liquidated. More than 600 were wounded. The enemy will be defeated regardless of what external support is being provided to them. And there is such external support. According to reports and information that is available, support for terrorists is being provided by Americans and their allies to varying degrees. They are providing support to terrorists. We believe it would benefit to the Western countries to dispel all suspicions related to their role in these terrorist actions. In this context, we wish to pay particular attention to the identified trail to the Ukrainian Main Directorate of Intelligence, the GRU, in the organization of hostilities and providing weapons to fighters operating in the northwest of Syria. We've repeatedly stated, including at the United Nations Security Council, we've referred to the identification in Idlib province of the Ukrainian military instructors from the GRU, and they were training HTS fighters for combat operations. Cooperation between Ukrainian and Syrian terrorists motivated by hatred towards Syria and Russia is underway, both when it comes to the recruitment of fighters into the ranks of the Ukrainian armed forces and for mounting attacks against Russian and Syrian troops in Syria. Today, reports surfaced showing that Ukrainian specialists accompanied by HTS terrorists were observed in the training center in Aleppo province. HTS fighters have not only not concealed the fact that they are supported by Ukraine, but they are also openly flaunting this. We have also shared information that Ukrainian GRU staff are arming fighters in Idlib, including with drones and coordinated GPS modules. Experts, including Western experts, were at the time skeptical about this information. What happened on 27 November corroborated our data. Moreover, it became clear yet again that under the Kiev regime supported by the West, Ukraine has morphed into a hotbed of international terrorism and presents an openly threatening international peace and security. And this is attested to inter alia, not just by the terrorist attacks perpetrated by it in Russia, but also by its operations in the Sahel and in Syria. Mr. President, the events of recent days in Syria clearly demonstrate the perniciousness of the policy of the United States and their allies, who have been illegally present in Syria since 2014 under the pretext of countering terrorism. Their perniciousness of the policy of undermining state institutions in this Middle East country, including through the illegal presence of U.S. troops in the Trans-Euphrates and Natanz. An equally destructive factor lies in the motivation and the aspiration of Washington to preserve de facto occupation of the wealth of oil, gas, and agricultural resources in areas in the northeast of Syria. The U.S. and allies take any opportunity to sow chaos in the country, using sanctions to asphyxiate the country's economy and supporting Idlib-based terrorists and extremists and the extremist underground in the Syrian Arab Republic. At the same time, they are openly attempting to whitewash the HTS, presenting the terrorist organization as some kind of allegedly moderate Syrian opposition. The HTS has just demonstrated its so-called moderation and moderate nature. Such double standards are unacceptable in the fight against international terrorist groups, which have been designated as such by the UN Security Council. And of course, this fight must continue against the Security Council listed terrorist groups. We expect of Washington and its satellites that today they categorically condemn the actions of the former al-Nusra affiliates and that they express support for the legitimate Syrian government, which is under attack by terrorists, as was done by Syria's neighbors, as well as members of the League of Arab States. As practice has shown, the use of terrorists for the advancement of parochial geopolitical agendas always backfires against their patrons. For our part, we are maintaining intense contacts with our partners under the Astana format. We are engaged in contact with colleagues from Iran and Turkey at various levels, which have reaffirmed our shared concern in light of the military escalation in Aleppo and Idlib, as well as the need to coordinate joint efforts to stabilize the situation in Syria, first and foremost by tapping into the potential of Astana. We consistently and continuously advocate reverting back to implementation of the agreement on the ceasefire in Idlib dating March 2020. We believe firmly that stabilization on the ground and the restoration of a lasting peace and security in the Syrian Arab Republic is only possible by ending the illegal foreign military presence which is carried out in violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria and the end of airstrikes against Syrian territory. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Switzerland would like to thank Special Envoy Geert Pedersen for his presentation. We have also taken note of the briefing provided by Mr. Raed Al-Saleh, Director of the White Helmets. The intensification of hostilities in the provinces of Idlib and Aleppo in recent days is very worrying. This new escalation risks having serious repercussions for achieving peace and security in the country and throughout the region. It must stop immediately. Switzerland condemns the fact that the vast offensive by armed opposition groups led by HTS and the retaliatory strikes carried out by the Syrian government and its allies have targeted civilian objects and resulted in the deaths of dozens of civilians, as well as the forced displacement of tens of thousands, including many children. We join the Special Envoy in calling on the parties to put an urgent end to this spiral of violence and to respect their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law. This includes the strict application of the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution in the conduct of hostilities in order to spare civilians and guarantee protection, particularly to vulnerable groups. Switzerland is alarmed by reports that these hostilities are affecting access to water, food, and essential services, and seriously jeopardizing the delivery of humanitarian aid in the north and northwest of the country. It is crucial to allow humanitarian actors to rapidly assess the needs of the civilian population. Their safety must also be guaranteed, as stated in Resolution 2730 of this Council, including by allowing them to leave the conflict zones unharmed. Switzerland has consistently reiterated that the rapid, safe, and unimpeded delivery of aid to civilians in need is an obligation under international humanitarian law. In order to reach civilians in need, including the newly displaced and those trapped by the fighting, all forms of aid delivery are crucial, including cross-border aid through the Bab al-Hawa, Bab al-Salam, and al-Ray crossing points, and aid across the front lines, even if the front lines are moving. Civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, water and electricity stations, and camps for displaced persons, must never be targeted. We recall that the Aleppo airport receives goods transported via the United Nations Humanitarian Air Service, and we call for the protection of this critical operation. Finally, we stress the importance of ensuring that humanitarian aid funding is robust, predictable, and commensurate with the growing needs of the population wherever they may be. Almost 17 million people, virtually the entire Syrian population, are today in need of assistance. This also includes the hundreds of thousands of people who have fled hostilities in neighboring Lebanon. Mr. President, this intensification of hostilities is the consequence of the political vacuum and the absence of a political process for many years in Syria. Switzerland urges the Syrian parties and those with influence over them, including the guarantor states of the Astana process and other influential states, to give priority to dialogue and diplomacy. We call on them to coordinate their efforts with those of the UN Special Envoy to achieve a national ceasefire and a credible peace process. In this respect, Switzerland will continue its commitment and remains ready to make Geneva available for any initiatives or peace talks under the aegis of the United Nations. Only a political solution within the meaning of UN Security Council Resolution 2254 can put an end to this terrible conflict. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, President. I thank Special Envoy Pedersen for his briefing and the comprehensive update on what is a fast-moving situation. I was also grateful to Mr. Al-Saleh for his briefing. I'll make 3 points today. First, the Council meeting today serves as a sobering reminder that Syria remains as dangerous as ever. We're deeply concerned about the potential for further escalation, particularly large-scale attacks by the regime or Russia against civilians. Colleagues, we've seen the lengths the Assad regime will go to when challenged. Until Syria fully declares and destroys its chemical weapons, this Council should remain focused on this ongoing threat to peace and security of Syria and to the international community. We strongly urge de-escalation and call on parties to act in accordance with international humanitarian law. This includes measures to protect civilian lives and infrastructure, such as health facilities and schools. Further escalation will only lead to more displacement of vulnerable people, disrupted humanitarian aid access, and ultimately, more suffering. Growing instability will only reduce prospects for recovery or for refugees to return home in a safe, dignified, and voluntary manner. Second, the humanitarian crisis in Syria, especially the northwest, was already dire before this latest escalation, with 4.2 million people requiring assistance. Further conflict, alongside harsh winter conditions, will only exacerbate the suffering of those in need. So we urge all actors to ensure continuous and uninterrupted humanitarian assistance and access across the whole of Syria. Third, President, the current fighting is a stark reminder that the situation in Syria is not sustainable. A frozen conflict is not peace. Only a Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political solution will resolve the conflict and bring much-needed security and stability for Syrians. The Assad regime, along with its Russian and Iranian backers, has created the conditions for instability and the current escalation through its ongoing refusal to engage in the political process. Whilst the trajectory of this escalation is uncertain, it is once again clear that after 13 years of conflict, no side has or can decisively win through force. The regime and all actors in Syria's conflict must support and engage constructively with negotiations as called for in Resolution 2254. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Malta. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you, President. I also thank Special Envoy Pedersen and Director Al-Saleh for their insights today on the urgent and escalating security situation in Syria. Over the past 7 days, we have witnessed a significant military offensive led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, launched from Idlib. This offensive rapidly seized control of several areas in Aleppo, with forces reportedly advancing to the outskirts of Hama following the withdrawal of the Syrian army. Within the city, reports indicate hospitals are being overrun and civilians are fleeing in fear of being caught in the crossfire. Subsequent airstrikes in support of both the Syrian government and opposition forces have compounded the situation and resulted in multiple casualties. While we have received reports of intensified shelling in Idlib and airstrikes hitting displacement camps, the full extent of these developments in Syria's northwest remain unclear. The new front line between Hama and Aleppo is being fortified, raising fears of urban warfare involving air power and explosive weapons. Such acts could bring devastation reminiscent of the horrors witnessed in Aleppo in 2016. The immediate developments in the crisis are now of critical concern, not only to the people of Syria, but to the wider region of the world. Malta reiterates the cause of Special Envoy Pedersen. All parties now exercise maximum restraint and stringently uphold their obligations to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. The steps taken by all parties in the coming days will set the course of this crisis. We must avoid the sole reliance on military firepower seen elsewhere in Syria. We remain deeply concerned about the potential mobilization and heavy fighting in northeastern Syria and the resurgence of violent extremist groups. Regrettably, the UN's humanitarian response is already severely constrained. In the face of further violence and displacement, humanitarian actors will not be able to scale up and address what remains a deeply political problem. We are reminded once again that determined political efforts are needed to address humanitarian problems. President, for years we have been warned of the consequences of failing to prioritize true conflict resolution in line with Resolution 2254. In Malta's view, we must transition from what the Special Envoy termed as conflict management in Syria to a strategy that effectively promotes conflict resolution. Great power politics have resulted in untold misery and suffering for millions across Syria and the region. No actor or their backers are without blame. This is not the moment for states to redraw borders through force. Instead, we must amplify genuine diplomacy and see the spin and false narratives and work collectively to see through the spin and false narratives and work collectively to prevent further carnage. We must restore respect for the norms and laws of warfare and uphold the resolutions of this Council for the countless civilians trapped in conflict. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Since this is my first statement in the month of December in this chamber, I would like to thank the delegation of United Kingdom, led by Ambassador Woodward, for their leadership in November, and wish every success to the United States in steering our work this month. I thank Special Envoy Pedersen for his briefing, and I thank Al-Saleh, Director of the White Helmets, for his valuable contribution. In recent days, we have seen a significant shift in Syria, which has again turned into an active war zone. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is a terrorist group recognized as such by this Council. Their recent escalation has already taken human lives and continues to pose severe risk to civilians. Their actions have serious implications for regional and international peace and security. Slovenia urges all parties to immediately de-escalate. There is no military solution to the conflict. We call on all actors to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law. Protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure is of utmost importance. All efforts should be accompanied by preventing further displacement and disruption of humanitarian access. Reignition of a wider conflict in Syria would also have a devastating impact on the region, jeopardizing the recent progress in Lebanon and deteriorating already precarious situation of refugees and IDPs. Mr. President, over the past months, Special Envoy Pedersen has repeatedly warned us of the risks of escalation and the fact that no Syrian party or existing groupings of actors can resolve the Syrian conflict via military means. The recent events should be a wake-up call to the Syrian government and key international stakeholders on the urgent need to find a political way out of the nearly 14 years long conflict. We cannot allow the recent resurgence of violence to add another fuel to the fire that will further extend the conflict. Slovenia underscores the urgency for a Syrian-led political solution that meets the aspirations of its people in accordance with the UN Security Council Resolution 2254. The people of Syria do not need another violent conflict. They have suffered more than enough. What they need is a genuine and inclusive political process that will give them hope and finally chart their way towards lasting peace. Slovenia will continue to support Special Envoy's efforts toward this end. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Special Envoy Pedersen and Mr. Reid Al-Saleh for their briefings. The situation is extremely fluid, but I would like to say a few words. According to the media report, rebel armed groups led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham have advanced to large parts of Aleppo. Additionally, we understand that there is information that HTS has taken control of sub-villages in central Syria. It has been reported that the Assad regime is intensifying its airstrikes against the rebels. The increase of hostilities has already resulted in the loss of innocent civilian lives, including women and children. The escalation of the conflict must be avoided, as it would further destroy the country, which has already been devastated by nearly 14 years of conflict. We are closely monitoring the situation and urge all parties concerned to de-escalate and protect the civilian populations, as well as civilian infrastructure, in order to avoid further deterioration of the humanitarian situation, and respecting international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Mr. President, Japan reiterates its position that only solution to the political stalemate in Syria is to advance Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political process, consistent with Security Council Resolution 2254. In this regard, we echo the Special Envoy's call for urgent and serious political engagement to spare further bloodshed and focus on a political solution. Despite these challenging circumstances, we must not give up promoting the political process. Japan calls on all stakeholders to commit to engaging in dialogue to bring one of the worst humanitarian crises of the century to an end. Mr. President, it is our sincere hope that the current development will not lead to another phase of confrontation and tragedy. Japan will continue to make diplomatic efforts in close coordination with the international community and persistently call on all parties to take constructive steps toward advancing the process toward a political solution to the Syrian crisis. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador. You have the floor, sir.
Gracias, President. Thank you, President. We are grateful to Special Envoy Geir Pedersen for the briefing provided. We take note of the civil society representative for the information provided, and we welcome the presence of the representatives of Syria, Iran, and Turkey with us. Mr. President, the escalation of violent incidents within Syria, in particular in the cities of Aleppo and Idlib, compounds the fragile security situation in the region and increases threats of international peace and security. The consequences of this protracted war have been borne by the civilian population, and they have become prisoners of violence and instability. Mr. Pedersen's references to the operation of a terrorist group designated as such by the Security Council is disturbing. Along these lines, Ecuador unequivocally condemns terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, regardless of their origin. The parties involved in this new phase of the conflict must observe maximum restraint in order to ensure protection for the civilian population and critical infrastructure, pursuant to the provisions of international humanitarian law. We have seen Special Envoy Pedersen's efforts to renew trust, to elicit commitment from the parties or the countries in the region and other countries with influence, and his efforts to favor political dialogue, which is Syrian-led and facilitated by the United Nations as the only viable tool for resolving the conflict in strict compliance with the contents of this Council's Resolution 2254. Mr. President, Ecuador expresses its support for the tireless work of the UN team in Syria. Today, more than ever, joint actions by the international community must be focused on solidifying genuine political negotiations which will lead to a definitive cessation of hostilities and to the establishment of sustainable peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, I wish to thank Mr. Peterson and Mr. Al-Saleh for their statements. France has been monitoring with great concern the recent developments in Syria, specifically in the northwest. All parties have an obligation to respect international humanitarian law. France has continuously repeated the following: a credible political process remains the only way to achieve a lasting peace. Any continuation of escalation is to the detriment of civilian populations who have already paid a high price after 13 years of civil war. In recent days, the Syrian regime and its allies have once again begun to target densely populated areas and civilian infrastructure in Aleppo and Idlib. Everything possible needs to be done to avert disruptions of humanitarian access as well as more displacements of people. The recent hostilities have occurred in a deteriorated humanitarian situation as winter approaches. There is a need to maintain of access for humanitarian assistance to keep these paths open, both across borders and across front lines as they evolve. The recent hostilities demonstrate the weakness of the regime and are the result of the continuous refusal of the Damascus regime to engage in a political process. We seek to achieve peace, and the Syrian people aspire to achieve peace. It is high time for Damascus to seize this opportunity. In this vein, we reiterate our full support for Geir Peterson and for the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2254 and all of the provisions thereof. We call for collective mobilization for the regime to honor its obligations and to demonstrate openness vis-à-vis the Syrian people. Recent developments show the need to, without delay, to resume meetings of the Syrian Constitutional Committee under the aegis of the United Nations. We stand ready, provided there be tangible and verifiable progress in the political process, to begin the lifting of sanctions and to envisage the financing of recovery. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. At the outset, I wish to state our position on the procedural vote before the start of today's meeting. We regret that the rotating presidency, without any consultation, imposed the participation of a representative of white helmets as a briefer. President, I thank Special Envoy Patterson for his briefing and welcome the presence of representatives of Syria, Iran, Lebanon, and Turkey at the meeting. The large-scale attacks on Aleppo, Idlib, and other places by HTS and other terrorist forces have undermined the largely calm situation maintained over the past few years. A few years ago, the fighting in Aleppo and other places caused heavy casualties and destruction. The ferocity of the fighting is still fresh in our minds. The ongoing conflict will undoubtedly bring new suffering to ordinary people, which is a source of deep concern and worry for China. Armed forces have also seized the Iranian consulate in Aleppo, which is a deplorable act that violates international law. China condemns such acts. I wish to reiterate that terrorism is the common enemy of the international community. China supports Syria's efforts to combat terrorism and safeguard national security and stability. The international community should adhere to a unified standard and adopt a zero-tolerance approach in supporting and assisting the Syrian government in eliminating the threat posed by terrorist forces in its territory. China calls on all countries to strengthen coordination and take measures to cut off terrorists' routes of movement and their channels for obtaining weapons and other materials so as to prevent them from creating turmoil. The Syrian issue has dragged on to this date as a result of a combination of multiple factors. It is China's consistent view that political settlements is the only way out. The international community should earnestly respect Syria's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. Foreign forces must end their illegal military presence in Syria. relevant country should immediately lift unilateral sanctions against Syria. China once again calls on the international community to remain firmly committed to the general direction of a political settlement and to support the advancement of the Syrian political process that is Syrian-led and Syrian-owned, and to allow the Syrian people to decide on the future of their country on their own, free from foreign interference. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank Special Envoy Patterson for his briefing. I also appreciate Director R. Saleh's briefing from the ground. The Republic of Korea expresses its grave concern over the escalating instability and power vacuum in Syria. The advances of HTS and other non-state actors have significantly and abruptly destabilized the security situation in and around Aleppo, Idlib, and Hama, marking an unexpected shift not seen in a decade. The involvement of regional stakeholders and non-state actors in this conflict is further exacerbating the volatile situation, creating conditions that risk igniting a mutually reinforcing cycle of violence. In this regard, I would like to make 3 points. First, we urge all parties to cease hostilities and recommit to the political process in line with the Security Council Resolution 2254. Once labeled a frozen conflict, the situation in Syria demonstrates that a permafrost deadlock is not a solution at all. Without meaningful dialogue, the ice will thaw and chaos will only return. To avoid a serious relapse into the total chaos of the past, we reiterate our call for all parties to recommit to the political process, which is the only sustainable way forward in this long-standing, yet quickly reheating crisis. Second, we call on all foreign powers to strictly refrain from escalating the conflict and create a conducive environment for the Syrian-led dialogue. Neither support for extremist rebels by foreign states, nor assistance to government forces attacking their own people can be justified under international law. In this regard, we are greatly concerned about reports of attacks launched by armed factions, as well as airstrike targeting the Syrian people, including in healthcare facilities and schools in Aleppo and Idlib. Such actions only exacerbate sufferings of the innocent civilians and prolong the conflict, and we deplore any attempt by regional powers to exploit the current turmoil for parochial interests. Instead, the focus must shift toward meaningful and constructive international engagement. Key international stakeholders should collaborate with the Special Envoy Patterson to invigorate diplomatic efforts and lay the path for viable and inclusive political solution. Third, we urge all parties to uphold civilians' rights under international humanitarian law, international human rights law. Reports of civilian casualties and damages to civil infrastructure, as well as forced conscriptions, suggest potential violations. And accountability must extend to all violators, regardless of their affiliation, be it with government, foreign forces, rebel groups, or terrorist organizations. We simply cannot allow impunity to reign. In particular, the right to life, freedom of expression and worship, and protection against the forced recruitment must be upheld without exception. Ethnic and religious minorities must never face persecution on the basis of their identity under any circumstances. Mr. President, from Gaza to Lebanon to Syria, the Middle East is experiencing one of its darkest ever periods of turmoil. The recent ceasefire across the blue line, albeit fragile, stands as one glimmer of positivity that could illuminate the beginning of the end to this crisis. The Republic of Korea, as a council member and a steadfast friend to all Middle Eastern states, hopes that 2025 will bring signs of de-escalation and progress toward the lasting peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the United States. Let me first thank Special Envoy Pedersen and Mr. Saleh for your briefings. I wish to especially thank Mr. Saleh for his and the White Helmet's efforts to bring to the attention of the world the repeated use of chemical weapons by the Syrian regime against its own people. It is essential that you are here today. Colleagues, the United States is closely monitoring the situation in Syria. For many years, the Syrian government has been engaged in a civil war backed by Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah. All three of those actors have recently been distracted and weakened by conflicts elsewhere, and so it is no surprise that we have seen actors in Syria try and take advantage of that over the last several days. Indeed, the Assad regime's ongoing refusal to engage in the political process outlined in Resolution 2254 and its reliance on Russia and Iran created the conditions now unfolding, including the collapse of the Assad regime lines in northwest Syria. At the same time, the recent rebel offensive, which the United States had nothing to do with, is led by a group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, otherwise known as HTS, that is a U.S. and UN-designated terrorist organization. We obviously have concerns about this group. We will continue to fully defend and protect U.S. personnel and U.S. military positions, which remain essential to ensuring that ISIS can never again resurge in Syria. Diplomatically, we have been in contact over the last several days with regional leaders, many of whom have joined us in urging de-escalation. We are also urging the protection of all civilians, including members of minority groups, the protection of civilian infrastructure, and unhindered humanitarian access to all those in need. We reiterate our call on all parties to commit to the principles of freedom, dignity, and the safety of all Syrians. We are hopeful that the Syrian opposition can play a role in ensuring those principles. It is important that areas affected by recent fighting resume daily activities safely and as soon as possible. Toward that end, humanitarian affected by recent fighting resume daily activities safely and as soon as possible. Toward that end, humanitarian access must be maintained so that aid can reach all people in need. The UN, which is working alongside NGOs responding on the ground, has an important role to play. We encourage strong support for its efforts, including to address the needs of internally displaced persons fleeing the fighting. We further encourage all parties to cooperate with the Independent Institution on Missing Persons in Syria, including to ascertain the fate and whereabouts of regime prisoners released from prisons in southern Aleppo. Some of these prisoners included wrongfully held political detainees. We must continue to stand with victims, families, and survivors who seek our support and, equally important, accountability. Colleagues, the fact that HTS is listed as a terrorist organization by the U.S. and UN does not justify the further atrocities by the Assad regime and its Russian backers. Since November 27, these have included attacks by the regime and its Russian backers on schools and hospitals in both Idlib and Aleppo, causing civilian casualties. The Council must speak with one voice in demanding that all parties cease brutal aerial attacks and adhere to international law. We must also renew this Council's demand that the regime not launch a chemical weapons attack, as it has done more than 50 times over the course of this conflict. And we must continue to hold the regime and its backers to account for these heinous actions. For far too long, the Assad regime has lent out its own country to Hezbollah and other Iran-backed militant groups, instead of sitting down with the opposition. Russia has supported Assad's intransigence, repeatedly blocking venues for UN-mediated talks. Recent events serve as a stark reminder that Syria will never be at peace until Assad accepts a settlement that gives all Syrians a voice in the country's future. Again, the United States will defend and protect U.S. personnel and U.S. military positions in northeast Syria, which remain essential to ensuring that ISIS can never resurge. We will continue coordinating closely with our partners in the region to de-escalate tensions. And we will continue to support full implementation of UN Security Council resolutions that could bring a measure of peace and stability to Syria and protection to civilians, including religious minorities. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Mr. President, first, the delegation of my country would like to condemn the failure of the U.S. presidency at the start of its presidency of the Security Council for this current month to respect the procedures of the work of the Security Council and the running of its sessions and using it to serve its own agenda and try to do harm to a member state of the United Nations for well-known objectives that are manifest in the continued U.S. support and its investment in terrorism that my country is confronting and which is manifest in Daesh and the HTS, Jabhat al-Nusra, the terrorist organizations, providing cover for them and furthering their hostilities towards my country. In addition, you are attempting to avert attention from the unlimited U.S. support in this council and outside this council to the Israeli occupying entity and its barbaric crimes. This is a position that removes any credibility from the United States in dealing with human rights issues. We reject the absenting of the true representatives of the Syrian people and Syrian NGOs. We have over 1,400 Syrian NGOs, licensed NGOs, that you do not allow to attend in this council, despite the fact that they work diligently and effectively on the ground in partnership with the Syrian government and the United Nations and humanitarian partners to improve the humanitarian and living conditions of the Syrian people. Those are who better able to give the Security Council an impression of their humanitarian work and the great challenges that they are facing in a professional manner, an objective one, and a true one, away from political agendas and away from disinformation and the lies that we have repeatedly heard in this chamber. Heroes like the Syrian Arab civil defense teams that are exerting efforts, endangering their lives to protect Syrians. And we have seen their heroism over the years of the terrorist war against Syria and after the earthquake and in confronting the forest fires recently. Those are the true representatives of the Syrian Defense Forces, not others. The heroes of the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, who have lost 66 martyrs, most recently, just a few days ago, at a border crossing, when one was martyred by an Israeli airstrike as they were helping persons displaced coming in from sisterly Lebanon. Those are the true Syrian heroes. And many of Syrian volunteers who volunteer in humanitarian and charitable work and who are working under an unjust siege imposed by the U.S. administration, not to mention the unjust UCMs, the use of an organization that is tied to Jabhat al-Nusra, and bringing them and inviting them to this chamber is an insult to the chamber and the members of the Security Council. And this does not insult my country, it insults the U.S. presidency of the Security Council. If you have any doubt as to what I'm saying, then I refer you to the statement by the official spokesperson of the U.S. State Department, the former spokesperson, Mark Toller, who responded to questions on the 27th of April 2016, responded to media questions and stated that this group that you invited here today is related to extremist groups that constitute a threat to the United States. This is a statement that was said by your colleague, Mr. President, and this is available everywhere. I would also like to refer you to the letters that my country and the Russian Federation have addressed to your esteemed Council over the past years to respond to the lies that are being propagated by this organization and those who support it. However, the U.S. administration's animosity towards my country forces it and pushes it to invite whoever they want to this council to further their agenda. The U.S. administration, which invites to the council those who try to insult member states under the excuse of the freedom of expression and listening to the NGOs, is the very same administration that silenced the U.S. students and the professors of American universities when they went out to demonstrate and called for observing international law and putting an end to the genocide and the crimes, the Israeli crimes, against the people of Palestine and the countries of the region. What freedom of speech and what voices are you speaking of? Mr. President, I thank the delegations of Algeria, Guyana, Mozambique, Sierra Leone, the Russian Federation, and China for their valued and appreciated support of our request to hold this emergency session. I also thank the delegations of Russia and China and Algeria and Mozambique for their vote at the start of this session. We meet here today after the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham Jabhat al-Nusra terrorist organization, which is designated by the Security Council, as a terrorist entity, along with other terrorist organizations that are affiliated with it, which include thousands of foreign terrorist fighters. We meet here after they have launched a large-scale attack from multiple fronts on multiple areas in northern Syria, especially on the governorates of Aleppo and Idlib, with the aim of seizing control of them and part of the international highway known as M5, which connects northern Syria with its southern regions. This terrorist attack, this is a terrorist attack, comes with the continued influx of terrorists across the northern borders, with an intensified external support provided to them, including with military equipment, heavy weaponry, vehicles, large numbers of drones, modern communication technologies, in addition to securing military and logistic supply lines. This has enabled the terrorist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and its affiliated terrorist entities operating under their command to seize control of large areas in Aleppo after attacking several villages and towns along the routes leading to the city. The scale and scope of the terrorist attack carried out by these terrorist organizations demonstrates unequivocally the extent of the support provided to them by regional and international parties who have used terrorism as an instrument in their foreign policy to target the Syrian state, to undermine its security and stability, and to cause suffering to its people. And denying this does not do any good. Denial does not do any good. Naturally, this terrorist attack could not have been carried out without a green light and an operational order that is jointly issued by Turkey and Israel that was prepared for by the repeated Israeli assaults on Syrian territories. Would you accept this terrorist attack by a terrorist group that was listed by the Security Council against any of your countries or against any country that's member of the United Nations? Mr. President, This terrorist attack has terrified civilians, especially the city of Aleppo, whose population reaches approximately 2.5 million people. It has disrupted all aspects of life in the city, leading to waves of displacement. Thousands of families have fled towards state-controlled areas. Meanwhile, those still trapped inside the city are facing dire humanitarian conditions. And attacks by the terrorist organizations, acts of brutalization against civilians and law enforcement personnel. The terrorist group's attacks have also targeted scientific professionals and the University of Aleppo's dormitory. This has led to the martyrdom of a number of students, and it has caused injury among others. It forced the rest to leave the city during the exam period at the university. Diplomatic and consular missions in the city were not spared from the attacks by those terrorist groups. Moreover, the crimes of the terrorist organizations were not limited to the aforementioned. These organizations have imposed a curfew on the residents of the city. They've stormed prisons. They've released a large number of convicted criminals in a malicious attempt to spread chaos and to shake stability amid rising fears among civilians of the repetition of practices of terrorist organizations, such as imposing their extremist Takfiri ideology, committing killing and torture and detention and forced disappearance, child recruitment, and the persecution of women and girls. These are the very same practices that the people of Idlib have repeatedly protested against and demanded putting an end to. These practices cannot be tolerated or ignored or inflicted upon the residents of other Syrian cities. Would you accept such practices, Mr. President? Mr. President, for many years, we have worked in collaboration with the United Nations member states to adopt instruments and resolutions aimed at addressing the threat posed by terrorism in all its forms and manifestations to international peace and security, and to drying up the sources of its financing and armament, and to countering violent extremism that leads to terrorism, and to combating incitement and hate speech. However, the inclination of some states to exploit terrorism as an investment has obstructed the achievement of the desired outcomes. It has prolonged the scourge of terrorism. The problem is the lack of political will on the part of these states, whose hostile policies and practices against my country have enabled terrorism to establish a foothold in areas under the illegal foreign military presence on Syrian territory. Today, the suffering endured by our people in Aleppo and other Syrian areas, infiltrated by terrorist organizations, compels us once again to raise our voices and call on the Security Council to condemn the terrorist attack and to hold the states sponsoring and operating these terrorist organizations accountable, urging them to abandon these policies and prevent the entrenchment of this terrorist reality, or to continue to hold these civilians hostage by these organizations. This is the call that is being made by our people in Aleppo and northern Syria, a call that is addressed to you, Mr. President. The terrorist attack on northern Syria is a flagrant violation of the resolutions of the United Nations and the Security Council related to terrorism, as well as the de-escalation zones adopted by the Astana Formula process, which reaffirmed in its most recent final statement the full respect for Syria's sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity, as well as continuing efforts to combat terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. These commitments are commitments that the Turkish guarantor failed to fulfill. The Syrian Arab Republic demands the Security Council to issue a clear and unequivocal condemnation of this terrorist attack carried out by an organization designated on the Security Council's list of terrorist entities, which comprises tens of thousands of foreign terrorists. My country firmly rejects all attempts to whitewash the image of these terrorist organizations by adopting alternative names intended to mislead global public opinion. We in Syria hold the states supporting the terrorist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham organization and its affiliates fully responsible for this attack and all of its consequences. Syria calls on the United Nations to compel these states to comply with the obligations set by relevant Security Council resolutions on combating terrorism, primarily Resolution 2170 on combating ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra, and Resolution 2178 on addressing the phenomenon of foreign terrorist fighters, and the United Nations Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy. My country emphasizes the need to include entities and economic, financial, commercial, and media institutions that provide funding, supplies, and communication services to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and allied entities on the Security Council's designated lists. Syria, state, army, and people, reaffirms its commitment to exercise its sovereign right and to fulfill its constitutional and legal duty to combat terrorist organizations with all necessary force and determination. Syria will take all necessary measures to defend its citizens, to confront the threat posed by terrorism, to liberate its land from the terrorist presence, and to restore the authority of the state and the rule of law over the entire national territory of the Syrian Arab Republic. This is the legitimate right of every country. This not only serves Syria, it also guarantees the stability of the entire region, its security, and the safety of its peoples and its countries. Those who sponsor terrorism in Syria must know that it will go back and it will turn against them. Syria has confronted terrorism in all its forms over the past years. It is capable and determined to eradicate it. My country looks forward to the support of all member states that believe in international law and the principles and purposes of the United Nations Charter for its efforts to combat terrorism and to defend its sovereignty, its independence, unity, territorial integrity, and the security and stability of its people. In closing, Mr. President, and in response to the allegations made by some delegations on the Syrian government's position on the political process, we'd like to reemphasize that the Syrian government has engaged positively in all the efforts aimed at the good of Syria and the interest of its people, at the good, at the betterment of Syria and the interest of its people, not the interest of others. Syria has engaged in a sincere and constructive cooperation with the United Nations and its representatives. Syria has adopted a policy of national reconciliation and local settlements. We have taken a wide range of measures aimed at restoring security and stability, improving living conditions, providing basic services, and creating the appropriate conditions for the return of refugees and the displaced. Syria, and over the past years, has repeatedly emphasized that the terrorist organizations designated by the Security Council and with Daesh and Jabhat al-Nusra, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham at the forefront, and their affiliated entities, individuals, and organizations which have chosen terrorism and whose hands are stained with the blood of Syrians, those are the problem. They are not the solution. No one can imagine a solution or a political process with ISIS, Daesh, and Jabhat al-Nusra. We've also emphasized that any de-escalation agreements must not hinder or undermine efforts to combat terrorism, as guaranteed by international law, Security Council resolutions, and the Constitution of the Syrian Arab Republic.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Syrian conflict, now in its 14th year, remains a stark reminder of the cost of political inaction. Its root causes stem from the legitimate yet unmet aspirations of the Syrian people. Without a genuine process of national reconciliation, Syria will remain trapped in a cycle of instability and suffering. The ongoing Israeli attacks across the region further complicate the fragile situation. This spiral of violence must not destabilize Syria further. The painful developments since October 7th underline an essential truth. When political solutions to root causes are absent, crises inevitably resurface. This must guide our collective approach to addressing the Syrian crisis too. The resurgence of conflicts in Syria reflects the unresolved challenges that have plagued the country for over a decade. The reluctance of Damascus to engage in the political process with the opposition remain critical missteps that created conditions for the unfolding situation. Meanwhile, terrorist organizations exploit instability to further their agendas, posing serious security threats to the region. We initiated the Astana process to achieve de-escalation on the ground and reached a ceasefire. Since 2017, Turkey has played a leading role in establishing of a de-escalation zone around Idlib through various agreements with Astana partners. This process also created room for confidence-building measures between Damascus and the opposition. Unfortunately, this opportunity was not seized. Turkey has consistently prioritized maintaining calm in Idlib, which is at the 0 point of our border. We have warned repeatedly that attacks on Idlib de-escalation zone escalate tensions. The violations of the Astana agreements and the continued focus on military campaigns rather than national reconciliation and counterterrorism have pushed Syria further into chaos. In response to allegations, I'd like to underscore that Turkey has neither supported nor consented to the launching of the ongoing operation. On the contrary, we have consistently worked to deter the cycle of violence, and today we once again stress the critical importance of de-escalation amid broader regional stability. The evolving dynamics on the ground, particularly in northwest Syria, have created a precarious situation. The entire country is profoundly impacted by the shifting lines of control. Significant risks for the period ahead include threat of further fragmentation. The so-called SDF may seek to consolidate its position in the northeast, while resurgence of Daesh remains a serious possibility. These dynamics could trigger new waves of migration and displacement, further straining regional stability and aggravating the already critical need for urgent humanitarian assistance. Turkey will continue to take all measures in order to protect its territory, people, and interests. Mr. President, the current stalemate is unsustainable both for Syria and the wider region. It is time for a realistic reassessment by all relevant actors. A sustainable solution to the Syrian crisis hinges on achieving a national consensus that aligns with the legitimate expectations of the Syrian people. The civil war in Syria should not escalate further. The international community must also recalibrate its overall approach to the conflict to support this objective at both regional and international levels. This demands that all stakeholders critically review their positions and, where necessary, make paradigm shifts to contribute to lasting peace and stability. It is imperative to actively engage in mutually reinforcing efforts across political, security, and humanitarian domains. In this respect, Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process under UN facilitation must be revived. The mistake of subcontracting the fight against Daesh to another terrorist organization, namely the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces, must end. This separatist entity is neither Syrian nor democratic. As a matter of fact, it is nothing but the PKK-YPG itself. The agendas of separatist terrorist organizations must be disrupted to preserve Syria's unity and territorial integrity. Moreover, creating the necessary conditions for the voluntary, safe, and dignified return of Syrian refugees must be a part and parcel of the settlement process. These simultaneous steps are essential and can no longer be postponed. Mr. President, the outlines of a negotiated political solution to this crisis were drawn 9 years ago by this very Council through its unanimously adopted Resolution 2254. Its provisions must be upheld and implemented. The resolution stresses the undeniable fact that it is the Syrian people who will decide the future of their country. All Syrians, including the opposition, diaspora, and the refugees. All relevant actors should support, without any further delay, the convening of the Constitutional Committee. To this end, Turkey has deployed extensive efforts to initiate dialogue between Damascus and the opposition. We have also strived for initiating dialogue with Damascus. Unfortunately, these efforts have yet to yield the desired results. Mr. President, my country shares a 911-kilometer border with Syria. The presence of terrorist organizations within Syria not only undermines the country's unity and territorial integrity, but also poses a direct threat to Turkey's national security as well as regional stability. This Council condemned the 23rd October terrorist attack in Ankara in the strongest terms. These terrorists infiltrated Turkey from Syrian territory. PKK, YPG, STF terrorist organization continues its attempts to advance its separatist agenda in Syria. I'd like to emphasize that Turkey is entitled to take appropriate measures in line with its inherent right of self-defense against direct and imminent threat posed to its national security by terrorist organizations operating in Syria. Mr. President, Turkey continues to work with all relevant actors to prevent escalation and advance political process. Turkish leaders are engaged in intense diplomatic efforts. Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Fidan, has agreed with his Russian and Iranian counterparts to convene Astana ministerial meeting soon. The Syrian people deserve peace, stability, and a future where their rights and freedoms are upheld. Turkey remains steadfast in its commitment to Syria's unity and territorial integrity. We urge this de-escalation, protection of civilians, and stand ready to work towards a credible political process for a sustainable, peaceful resolution of this enduring crisis. I thank you, Mr. President.
I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, we thank the Syrian Arab Republic, the Algeria, Mozambique, Sierra Leone, and Guyana for requesting this urgent meeting, as well as China and Russia for ensuring this critical issue receives the Council's attention. We also thank Special Envoy Mr. Peterson for his briefing. Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran expressed deep concern over the escalating situation in Syria. Recent development, particularly the coordinated terrorist operation by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a designated branch of Al-Qaeda, also known as Jabhat al-Nusra, have gravely threatened Syrian sovereignty and stability. As stated in the letter dated 1st December from the permanent representative of Syria, this terrorist organization has orchestrated large-scale coordinated attack on Aleppo and Idlib governorates, resulting in devastating consequences for the region and its people. During the terrorist attack to on Aleppo, the Iranian consulate premises was deliberately targeted by terrorist group. Attacks on diplomatic and consulate premises is a flagrant violation of international law and is strictly prohibited under any circumstances. No individual, group, or state has the right to commit or enable such acts. The responsibility for this brazen assault and violation lies with the countries that arm and support these terrorist groups, enabling their continued aggression and violation of international norms. Mr. President, at the heart of this crisis lies external support and intervention, which have perpetuated terrorism in Syria and undermined its sovereignty and territorial integrity. The scale and sophistication of HTS operation, including advanced weaponry and drones, highlight deliberate external support with the United States at the forefront, turning terrorism into a tool of foreign policy to advance their political agenda. The states responsible for fueling this conflict must be held accountable for their actions and devastating consequences they have inflicted on the Syrian people. This terrorist attack directly undermines the agreements that established the Idlib de-escalation area under the Astana Formula process. In the 22nd Astana format meeting held on 11 and 12 November, participating parties voiced grave concerns over the presence and activities of the terrorist groups that endanger civilians both within and beyond the Idlib de-escalation area. In the meantime, increased Israeli strike targeting civilians and infrastructure in Syria during November and October, combined with the regime's connection to HTS, indicate a coordinated effort to destabilize Syria further. Israel's relentless strike on border crossing between Syria and Lebanon have disrupted critical aid deliveries and forced hundreds of thousands to flee. Mr. President, what happened in Aleppo and Idlib should serve as a wake-up call for the entire region regarding the resurgence of terrorism and extremism. Insecurity and the spread of terrorism and violent extremism in Syria will not remain confined to its borders. Their impact will inevitably spill over, threatening the border region and beyond. No distinction can or should be made between types of terrorism. There is no such thing as good terrorism and bad terrorism. HTS, a terrorist group explicitly designated by under Security Council resolution, poses a grave threat to the peace and stability of the region. If the international community fails to confront this terrorist group decisively, its growing dominance over parts of Syria could trigger catastrophic consequences for the entire region and poses a serious threat to global peace and security. Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran remains steadfast in its support for the Syrian government and its people in their just and determined fight against terrorism. Iran fully recognizes and supports Syrian sovereign rights to combat and eliminate terrorist groups like HTS, which bring widespread destruction, chaos, and suffering whatever they operate. We emphasize that all measures to combat terrorism must be undertaken in coordination with and with the consent of the Syrian government, ensuring full respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic. Iran's recent active diplomatic engagement with its partners in Astana process, Russia, Turkey, as well as Syria, further underscore this commitment. Iran has called for an emergency meeting of the foreign ministers of the Astana process to address the recent developments in Syria and work towards a unified strategy to halt terrorist activities in the country. Dear colleagues, as stated time and again, the only sustainable resolution to the Syrian crisis is a political solution led and owned by the Syrian people that upholds Syria's sovereignty and independence. This requires ending foreign occupation and interference, stopping the exploitation of Syrian resources, ceasing all support for terrorist groups, and encouraging the parties to dialogue and actively engage in the political process. Additionally, the international community must prioritize humanitarian assistance, infrastructure recovery, and the safe return of refugees. The Syrian people deserve peace, dignity, and the chance to rebuild the nation free from terrorism and external manipulation. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Lebanon. You have the floor, sir.
السيد الرئيس يشرفني
Mr. President, I'm honored to deliver this statement on behalf of the Arab Group. At the outset, the group would like to congratulate you on presiding over the Security Council for this month of December. We thank you for responding to the request to convene this urgent meeting to discuss the serious developments in the Syrian Arab Republic. Mr. President, the Arab Group follows with great concern the events that are unfolding in Syria as of the 27th of November 2024, particularly in the governorates of Idlib and Aleppo. As a result of the attack that is led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Nusra Front, which is a UN Security Council listed terrorist group. This attack led to tragic loss of innocent civilian lives, including women and children. It led to significant damage to civilian infrastructure, as well as a large wave of displacement. The Arab Group condemns this terrorist attack and reiterates the need to implement Security Council counter-terrorism resolutions. The group stresses the importance of respecting the sovereignty, unity, stability, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic, and stresses the importance of combating terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. Mr. President, the group warns that the developments in the Syrian Arab Republic would have dire repercussions to regional and international peace and security. The group expresses its support for the Syrian Arab Republic as it faces and combats terrorism in the form of ISIL and al-Nusra Front entities and groups affiliated with them, as well as the Israeli repeated aggression against Syria and the ongoing Israeli occupation of the Syrian Golan. The group reiterates the need for efforts to restore stability and security throughout the Syrian Arab Republic, stop the suffering, and intensify the efforts to de-escalate the tensions and avoid bloodshed. It calls for a return to diplomatic and political solutions that would preserve the prosperity and security for the Syrian people and provide the conditions necessary for the return of Syrians to their homeland. The group calls for favoring the language of logic, to stay away from foreign agendas, to give priority and precedence to the Syrian national agenda. It calls for the withdrawal of all external parties that are illegally present in Syria and to focus all efforts towards the realization of a Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political solution without foreign interferences, in line with the Resolution 2254 that would preserve Syria's sovereignty, stability, independence, territorial integrity, and the security of its citizens. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the representative of Lebanon for their statement. The representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Mr. President, your statement today has become a glaring confirmation of the the unsavory U.S. foreign policy of the outgoing administration. You were unable to summon the courage to condemn a clear terrorist attack undertaken against peaceful civilians in peaceful Syrian cities who were laboriously seeking to establish peaceful life despite the hundreds of illegal unilateral sanctions imposed by your country. Furthermore, you have slyly been asserting that the attacks against Syria were perpetrated by certain rebels whom in your nefarious picture of the world, terrorists and extremists transform into attacking those countries who are carrying out independent policy that does not advance the interest of the United States, that does not policies and that do not advance U.S. interests. You did not even notice how you betrayed yourselves, having promised to protect not the lives of ordinary civilians, but just those of U.S. troops who are illegally occupying certain areas of Syria and who are unconscionably looting the resources of that country. Today, we once again saw that there are no such crimes, that the United States is willing to pass over in silence for the sake of profits of the deaths of 40,000 Palestinians come to mind, and the terrorist attacks against Syrian civilians by armed thugs also come to mind. There are no illusions what Washington is ever or will ever be willing to sincerely combat international terrorism. Nobody, after your words, will leave this chamber with such illusions. To be frank, we are pleased that we are on opposite sides of the barricades right now from you, because such understanding, such notions as honesty, justice, conscience are not part of the U.S.'s policy. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. I would like to make a very brief statement in response to some comments that have been made. I would, colleagues, I would submit to our colleague from the Russian Federation that he is in no position to accuse the United States of supporting terrorist groups. The United States has for decades fought the scourge of terrorism and will continue to fight that scourge of terrorism. So the representative from the Russian Federation is in no position to lecture us on this issue, particularly when it props up regimes that sponsor terrorism around the world. I now resume my function as President of the Council. Mr. Raed Al Saleh has made a request to take the floor to respond to some comments and questions. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, first I'd like to thank the Turkish government and the United States and the UK and France and all of the states that support the Syrian people. The representative of the barrel bombs regime continues to mislead the world. I will not respond to his allegations because, frankly, they lack credibility. But I advise you and I say to you that the Syrian people deserve to be represented by someone at this table, because the representatives of the chemical regime don't deserve the Security Council. They deserve the courtrooms of the ICJ, of the ICC, to be tried for the crimes against the Syrian people over the past 14 years. The United Nations organization owns over 1 million pieces of evidence of these violations perpetrated over the past 14 years. As the director of the White Helmets of the Syrian National Defense Force, Civil Defense Forces, I tell you that the Syrian Civil Defense is a neutral organization that is independent, that is transparent. It serves all parts of the Syrian people with no discrimination, regardless of their ethnicity or their religion. And finally, I advise the international community and all states, and especially the Arab countries, to listen to the Syrian people, to stand by the Syrian people, so that they can achieve their aspirations, so they can build the Syria of civilization. Syria is a 7,000-year-old civilization. The Syrian regime has turned Syria into a corridor for militias, terrorist militias. It had turned Syria into a country that manufactures and sells Captagon to the rest of the world. I thank you.
I thank Mr. Al-Saleh for the clarifications he's provided. The representative of the Syrian Arab Republic has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Sayyid Rais.
Mr. President, 10 years ago, we sat here in these chambers and adopted a resolution 2170 regarding combating ISIL and Al-Nusra Front. Days after that, we sat at the level of a high level in these chambers, and we adopted a resolution to combat foreign terrorist fighters. We have listened during that session to your representatives and to your fake promises to combat terrorism and your promise to support those countries that are subject to terrorist attacks. What did the 10 last years reveal to us? They revealed to us that you have supported each terrorist. You haven't left any terrorist organization without investing in them to serve your own agenda. This is not something that is suitable for the United States of America or any country to that effect. We are aware that you prefer Israel's interest over the interest of the peoples of our region. You attacked UNRWA, and you covered up for the killing of 249 UNRWA personnel and tried to undermine the agency just to serve Israel's interests. So what credibility are you talking about when you present to us tools that you have invented, that you have created in order to destabilize Syria and to create a situation and invent one, in fact, to establish what you have called the international coalition to fight terrorism? I haven't heard in my life, and I have worked for years in this organization, about an alliance that is established outside the frame of the UN without a mandate or authorization by the Security Council, that kills innocent civilians, destroys the city of Raqqa over the heads of its population, targets the Syrian army, as we witnessed in the Sarda mountain incident, the famous incident, allows terrorists to take over certain areas, targets a group of humanitarian volunteers, that went to repair the Euphrates dam years ago, which was affected and damaged as a result of your indiscriminate bombing. So you targeted the vehicle that carried these volunteers. If you had forgotten, we haven't. These chambers have heard us speak several times. We heard the false accusations against my country, but also facts that we have presented over the many years. If you want to continue on this path, I would like to repeat and reiterate that you are not betraying only the victims of terrorism in our countries, but rather and also the victims of terrorism of 9/11. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for their statement. I shall now make a further statement in my capacity as the representative of the United States. Colleagues, the Assad regime, as we all know, is a known supporter of terrorist groups throughout the Middle East. It has carried out ruthless, brutal attacks against its own people, especially, as I mentioned earlier, through its repeated use of chemical weapons against its own people. The crimes the regime has committed throughout the war over the last little more than a decade in Syria will not be forgotten, and the regime will be held accountable for these crimes. I now resume my function as President of the Council. The representative of the Syrian Arab Republic has requested the floor once again. I give him the floor.
Sayyid Rais.
Mr. President, repeating lies will do no good. Repeating wrongful policies will do no good. Continuing to defend crimes and practices and to advocate and to give lectures on human rights will do no good. We all know how you punish the Syrian people collectively through the unilateral coercive measures. We all know how you are depriving the Syrian people of the most basic needs of life. You are looting their wealth. Not only are you punishing them, but you're also robbing them. These are facts, Mr. President. I haven't seen in a single resolution of the United Nations or in the Charter anything that says or even indicates that counterterrorism can be used as an excuse to rob people of their wealth. I haven't seen this. If you use an international law or a Charter of the United Nations, you use a copy other than the one that we know, then please show it to us. Mr. President. The situation requires wise policies. It requires wisdom. It requires countering terrorism. The situation requires not placing millions of Syrians under the control of terrorist organizations. We need to guarantee the security and stability of the region. This terrorist threat is not in the interest of anyone. We have seen how you have behaved in Afghanistan. You fought for 20 years. You killed, you stole, you destroyed. Then you left the country. The women and the girls are still deprived of education and of their most basic rights. You must learn from the lessons of the past. You must follow sound policies, and you must stay away from destructive policies. End of statement.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for his statement. I understand the representative of the Russian Federation would like to take the floor. I give them the floor.
Yes, I will be very concise, Mr. President. I wish to simply state that today, thanks to your unskillful management, we have seen how a Security Council on a very serious question has morphed into a shameful political play through your invitation of a completely unworthy player and playing into his hands. I fully do not understand why you gave him the floor once again. He did not even state that he would answer a question of a delegation. We view this as egregious disregard for your obligations as a presidency, and we very much regret that.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.